Marco Benedetti never imagined that breaking into St. Peter's Basilica would be the night his childhood died forever, but as he slipped through the ancient shadows at 3:15 a.m., desperation had already rewritten every rule his 16 years had taught him. The boy who once served as an altar server in his neighborhood parish now moved like a ghost through the holiest cathedral on earth. His knowledge of sacred architecture serving as a roadmap to either salvation or damnation. The basilica's vast nave stretched before him like the throat of some sleeping titan, marble columns rising toward a dome that seemed to hold up heaven itself. Moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting fragmented rainbows across the floor where emperors and saints had once knelt in prayer. Each footstep, despite Marco's careful placement, seemed to echo with the weight of centuries, as if the stones themselves were recording every sin committed within these sacred walls. Marco pressed his palm against the cool marble of a pillar, steadying himself as his heart hammered against his ribs with the frantic rhythm of someone who had nothing left to lose. 3 months ago, he had been just another Roman teenager concerned with football matches and avoiding homework. His biggest worry whether Maria from his literature class might notice him. 3 months ago, his father Giuseppe had been working construction, his weathered hands steady as they guided concrete and steel into the shapes that built modern Rome. Now Giuseppe lay in a hospital bed, his body broken by a construction accident that had crushed more than just bones. It had destroyed their family's future. The insurance company had found reasons to deny coverage. The government assistance barely covered rent. And the loan sharks, who had seemed like angels offering help now, circled like vultures, demanding payments that grew larger each week while Giuseppe's condition worsened. Marco's eyes adjusted to the cathedral's dim interior as he moved deeper into the nave. His target clear in his mind, the Treasury Museum's overflow storage, where lesser artifacts were kept between exhibitions. Pieces valuable enough to pay for Giuseppe's surgery, small enough to disappear without immediate notice. The irony wasn't lost on him, stealing from God to save the man who had taught him to pray. But as Marco approached the ornate gates leading to the treasury area, a soft golden glow emanated from what should have been an empty transept. His blood turned to ice as he realized his carefully researched plan had encountered the one variable no amount of preparation could account for. Someone else was awake in the cathedral at this God-forsaken hour. The figure emerged from the shadows, like a vision materializing from prayer itself, elderly man in simple white robes, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who belonged in this sacred space as naturally as candlelight belonged to darkness. Marco's world contracted to a pinpoint of terror as he recognized the unmistakable silhouette of Pope Leo XIV himself, the most powerful man in Christendom, standing barely 20 meters away in the transept, where votive candles flickered like earthbound stars. Every muscle in Marco's body screamed at him to run, to vanish back into the Roman night like smoke, but his feet had become anchored to the marble floor by a fear so complete it seemed to strip away his very ability to breathe. He watched, paralyzed, as Pope Leo XIV knelt before a simple wooden crucifix, his weathered hands clasped in prayer with the concentration of someone conducting a conversation with eternity itself. Marco's mind raced through his options with the desperate efficiency of cornered prey. The treasury entrance was mere steps away, but reaching it now meant crossing directly through the Pope's line of sight. He could retreat, abandon his mission, return to face Giuseppe's disappointed eyes, and his younger siblings' empty bellies. Or he could wait, hope the Holy Father would finish his midnight prayers and disappear back into the papal apartments, leaving the cathedral's treasures unguarded. But as Marco shifted his weight, seeking a better position to wait out the Pope's vigil, his shoulder brushed against an ornate candlestand. The brass fixture swayed with a soft scrape against marble that shattered the cathedral's reverent silence like a stone through stained glass. Pope Leo XIV's head turned slowly, and when his eyes met Marco's across the vast nave, the boy felt the weight of divine judgment settling over him like a shroud. Marco had expected anger, righteous fury, perhaps fear from an elderly man confronted by an intruder in the middle of the night. Instead, he found himself staring into eyes that held only profound sadness and something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "You're very young to be carrying such heavy burdens alone," Pope Leo XIV said softly, his voice carrying across the cathedral's perfect acoustics without effort. He rose from his knees with deliberate care, never breaking eye contact with the trembling teenager. "Tell me, son, what darkness has driven you to seek light in such a dangerous place?" Marco's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his body coiling like a cornered animal, preparing to strike or flee. The Pope's gentle words felt more dangerous than any accusation, threatening to crack the brittle shell of resolve he had built. Around his desperation, "Don't," Marco said, his voice cracking like ice under pressure, the single word echoing off the cathedral's ancient stones with more force than he had intended. "Don't pretend to understand what you can't possibly know." Pope Leo XIV stepped closer, moving with the measured patience of someone who had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of human desperation. The flickering votive candles cast deep shadows across his weathered face, revealing lines carved by years of hearing confessions and carrying the weight of others' sins. "You're right," he said simply, his admission hanging in the sacred air between them. "I don't know your particular pain, but I recognize what drowning looks like." The unexpected acknowledgement hit Marco like a physical blow. He had armored himself for condemnation, for the cold righteousness of institutional authority, for the police sirens that should already be wailing across St. Peter's Square. This gentle recognition of his struggle felt like a blade sliding between his ribs, seeking the vulnerable places he had worked so hard to protect. "I'm not here for sympathy," Marco managed, though his voice trembled with the effort of maintaining its edge. His eyes darted toward the treasury entrance, calculating distances, escape routes. The impossibility of outrunning Vatican security if this conversation went wrong. "No." Pope Leo XIV agreed, moving closer still, close enough that Marco could see the genuine concern etched in every line of the Holy Father's face. "You're here for salvation. The question is whether you're trying to save someone else or yourself." Marco's breath caught in his throat. How could this man see so clearly into the heart of his desperation? "My father," escaping before he could stop them, as if the cathedral's sacred atmosphere was drawing confession from his very soul. "He's dying, and I can't. I've tried everything honest, everything legal. The doctors say there's hope, but only if—" His voice cracked like a dam under too much pressure. Pope Leo XIV's expression softened with a compassion so profound it seemed to fill the vast cathedral with something approaching peace. The Holy Father reached out slowly, his weathered hand coming to rest on Marco's trembling shoulder with the gentleness of benediction. "And so you came here, to the house of God, hoping to steal enough grace to keep death at bay." Marco flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away, his teenage bravado crumbling like ancient parchment. "He taught me to serve at Mass," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Giuseppe, my father, he used to bring me here when I was small, told me this was where miracles happened." "Tell me his name again," Pope Leo XIV said softly. "Tell me about the man worth risking your soul to save." Dawn crept across the Vatican gardens like a hesitant blessing, painting the ancient pathways in shades of rose and gold. Marco found himself walking beside Pope Leo XIV along a gravel path lined with olive trees, their footsteps the only sound in the sacred stillness. The impossibility of his situation wasn't lost on him hours ago. He had been a thief in the night, and now he moved through the Pope's private gardens like some trusted confidant, carrying secrets that felt too heavy for his 16-year-old shoulders. "It started with the scaffolding collapse," Marco said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign after months of keeping the full truth locked inside his chest. Giuseppe was working on a restoration project near the Pantheon, 20 meters up, securing the ancient stonework. Marco stopped beside a marble fountain, its gentle murmur mixing with the distant chimes of morning prayers. The safety inspector said the equipment was fine. The foreman said, "My father was careless. Everyone had someone else to blame." Pope Leo XIV remained silent, his presence steady as the ancient stones beneath their feet. A sparrow landed on the fountain's edge, drinking peacefully while Marco's world continued to fracture around the edges. "Spinal compression, internal bleeding, brain trauma," Marco continued, the medical terms still feeling like curse words in his mouth. 3 surgeries already, but the doctors say he needs experimental treatment in Switzerland, the kind that costs more than our family makes in 5 years. His voice cracked with the weight of months held back. "He still asks about my homework, even though the medications make him forget my name sometimes." Still tries to help with my sister's math problems, even though he can barely hold a pencil. The Pope's weathered hand found the fountain's marble, edge beside Marco's trembling fingers, and your mother. Cleaning office buildings at night, working market stalls during the day. Sophia and Luca, my little sister and brother, they think Papa's just tired from work. I haven't told them we have 2 weeks before the landlord throws us out. A bitter laugh escaped him. Turns out, dying construction workers don't generate much sympathy from landlords either. The sun was fully visible now, casting long shadows across the garden, while Marco's carefully constructed life lay in ruins at his feet. Sophia still believes in Santa Claus. Luca draws pictures of Giuseppe standing up, walking again. Marco turned to face Pope Leo XIV, his eyes red-rimmed, but blazing with desperate determination. So yes, I came here to steal from you, from God himself, if necessary, because what kind of son would I be if I didn't try everything? Pope Leo XIV's next words would either condemn him or offer something. Marco had stopped believing in hope. The Vatican Social Services Office felt like stepping into the administrative heart of mercy itself. Filing cabinets, lined walls adorned with photographs of children from every corner of the earth, while morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating case files that represented thousands of desperate families seeking help. Marco sat rigid in a wooden chair that probably dated back centuries, watching Pope Leo XIV settle behind a simple desk with the calm authority of someone accustomed to moving mountains with a signature. The Vatican maintains emergency medical funds for extraordinary circumstances, the Pope said, without preamble, pulling out a leather-bound ledger that looked older than most nations. Giuseppe's treatment in Switzerland is expensive, but not impossible. I can authorize the full amount this morning. Marco felt reality tilt on its axis, the words hitting him like a physical blow that knocked the breath from his lungs. You're saying you'll just ... give us the money. The question came out strangled, disbelieving, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever miracle was unfolding before him. Sister Catherine, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who managed the Vatican's charitable operations, looked up from her computer terminal with practiced efficiency. The Benedetti family qualifies under emergency medical provisions. I can process the paperwork immediately. I'm saying Giuseppe deserves every chance at life, Pope Leo XIV replied, his pen moving with deliberate strokes across the ancient paper. And his son deserves to sleep at night, knowing he didn't have to compromise his soul to save his father. The heavy oak door burst open with such violence that it struck the wall behind it, causing a framed photograph of orphaned children to rattle on its mount. Cardinal Toretti swept into the room like a storm cloud given human form, his scarlet robes billowing with barely contained fury. At 58, he possessed the kind of razor-sharp authority that could reduce Vatican accountants to trembling apologies with a single glance. Your Holiness, Cardinal Toretti said, his voice carrying the chill of alpine winds. Surely you're not seriously considering what I fear Sister Catherine just reported to my office. Pope Leo XIV didn't look up from his ledger, continuing his careful notation with the patience of someone who had weathered many such storms. Cardinal Toretti, may I present Marco Benedetti. Marco, Cardinal Toretti oversees our institutional protocols. Marco started to rise, but the cardinal's withering stare pinned him to the chair like a butterfly in a collector's case. The juvenile delinquent who violated Vatican security last night, the thief you should have turned over to the Roman authorities hours ago. The son, Pope Leo XIV, corrected with gentle steel, who found himself facing an impossible choice and chose love over law. Cardinal Toretti's hands clenched at his sides, his composure cracking like ice under pressure. Holy Father, with all due respect, we cannot simply distribute funds to every desperate criminal who manages to breach our walls. The difference between Vatican City and Marco's neighborhood in Torbella Monica was like stepping from paradise into purgatory. Graffiti-scarred apartment blocks reached toward a gray sky like broken teeth, their facades crumbling under the weight of decades and disappointment. Marco climbed the narrow stairs to his family's third-floor flat, the Pope's. Promise of help, feeling as fragile as spun glass in this harsh reality where miracles rarely survived past sunrise. Marco, is that you? Giuseppe's voice drifted from the small living room, weaker than it had been just yesterday, but still carrying the warmth that had guided Marco through every crisis of his 16 years. despite the medications that clouded his thoughts. Giuseppe's eyes still held the fierce love of a father who would die before letting his children suffer. "Yes, Papa, I'm home." Marco found his father propped up on their threadbare sofa, a colorful blanket covering his withered legs, reading a worn copy of job listings with the concentration of someone trying to forget his own limitations. 8-year-old Sophia and 6 Luca were building towers with mismatched blocks on the floor, their innocent laughter a bright counterpoint to the shadows that had settled over their home. "Did you hear anything from the hospital about Papa's treatment?" Sophia asked, her dark eyes wide with the hope that children carried so naturally. She had Giuseppe's stubborn chin and Marco's quick intelligence, but her faith remained unshaken by the harsh mathematics of poverty. Before Marco could answer, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the thin walls, too aggressive for neighbors, too rhythmic for delivery men. Marco's blood turned to ice. He recognized that sound from the desperate weeks when he had borrowed money from people who didn't accept late payments or sob stories. "Stay with Papa," Marco whispered to his siblings, moving toward the door like a man approaching his own execution. The men in the hallway looked like shadows, given human form black leather jackets despite the afternoon heat, faces that might have been carved from the same stone as ancient Roman statues, but without any trace of nobility. Salvatore stepped forward, his smile sharp enough to draw blood, flanked by 2 associates whose presence radiated the particular menace that came from men who had crossed lines ordinary people wouldn't even approach. "Marco Ragazzo, you've been avoiding our calls," Salvatore said, his voice carrying the deceptive warmth of a snake before it strikes. 3 weeks overdue on the interest payment. The numbers are becoming uncomfortable. "I told you, I need more time. My father's getting treatment. Salvatore laughed, a sound like glass shattering. "With what? Money? Vatican charity?" His expression hardened as he leaned closer. "You owe us 8,000 euros now, with penalties." Today, through the thin door, Marco could hear Sophia helping Giuseppe with his physical therapy exercises, her small voice counting repetitions with determined optimism. The Vatican press office had transformed into a battlefield. Camera flashes erupted like artillery fire as journalists from every major network on Earth crowded into the Sala Stampa, their voices creating a cacophony that seemed to shake the Renaissance frescoes themselves. The story had broken at dawn. Through a leaked Vatican security report, Pope Leo XIV gives medical fund to juvenile cathedral thief instead of pressing charges. Cardinal Toretti stood at the podium like a man facing his own execution, his usually immaculate appearance showing hairline cracks under the relentless assault of questions. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning, and his hands gripped the marble lectern with enough force to leave fingerprints in stone. "Your Eminence, is it true that His Holiness personally authorized funds for a teenage criminal's family expenses?" Cardinal Toretti, what message does this send about Vatican security protocols? Are we to understand that breaking into St. Peter's Basilica is now a valid fundraising strategy for Rome's youth? Each question landed like a physical blow, and Toretti's composure, legendary among Vatican insiders, began to fracture along the edges. His Holiness has always demonstrated exceptional compassion for those facing desperate circumstances. Compassion or catastrophic judgment? The voice belonged to James Mitchell from BBC World, his tone sharp enough to cut marble, conservative. Catholics worldwide are calling this an abdication of papal authority. How do you respond to claims that Pope Leo XIV has essentially put a price tag on Vatican brinkins? In his private study, Pope Leo XIV watched the coverage unfold across multiple screens arranged like windows into a world gone mad. Each monitor showed his face beside Marco's school photograph there, one from last year's yearbook, where the boy smiled with the confidence of someone whose biggest worry had been passing his literature exam. The headlines scrolled beneath in a dozen languages. Pope rewards, youth crime, Vatican security compromised, mercy, or madness. His phone rang incessantly, cardinals from 6 continents demanding explanations, Vatican department heads requesting emergency damage control meetings, and his chief of staff practically begging for guidance on managing what the media had already dubbed the Vatican youth scandal. But Pope Leo XIV sat in perfect stillness, his weathered hands folded in prayer, seemingly unmoved by the hurricane of criticism swirling around him. On one screen, a panel of theologians debated whether his actions constituted pastoral care or institutional suicide. On another, crime experts calculated the potential increase in juvenile delinquency if Vatican charity became perceived as a reward for criminal behavior. A soft knock interrupted his meditation. Cardinal Toretti entered without waiting for permission, his scarlet robes disheveled, and his face bearing the particular exhaustion that came from defending the indefensible to a hostile world. "Holy Father, the College of Cardinals is demanding an emergency session." The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. Giuseppe lay motionless in the narrow bed, his breathing shallow and labored under the tangle of tubes and monitors that had become his electronic lifeline. The cheerful yellow walls, painted to comfort sick children, seemed to mock the gravity of what was unfolding within them as Marco watched his father slip away by degrees while the world outside debated the Pope's mercy. Dr. Bianchi emerged from behind the monitors, his face bearing the particular exhaustion that came from delivering impossible news to desperate families. Marco stood beside Giuseppe's bed, like a sentinel guarding a treasure he was powerless to protect. His hand wrapped around his father's frail fingers, while Sofia and Luca pressed close against his sides. "The internal bleeding has accelerated, beyond our projections," Dr. Bianchi said, his voice professionally gentle but brutally honest. "We need to begin the Swiss protocol immediately, or ... He didn't finish the sentence. The machine's steady beeping filled the silence with electronic urgency. Marco felt the world narrow to a pinpoint of desperate clarity. How immediately? The flight to Zurich leaves in 4 hours. The treatment center is holding a slot, but only until midnight. After that ... The doctor's hands spread helplessly. "I'm sorry. I know the Vatican funding has been complicated by recent events. It has been authorized." The voice came from the doorway, calm and certain as cathedral bells. Pope Leo XIV stood there in simple white robes, flanked by 2 Vatican officials, carrying leather briefcases. His presence seemed to fill the clinical space with something indefinable, not quite peace, but the possibility of it. Marco's throat constricted with emotion he couldn't name. "Your Holiness, with everything happening in the news, you didn't need to come. A son fights for his father," the Pope said simply. Approaching Giuseppe's bedside with the reverence reserved for sacred ground, a father sacrifices everything. For his children, these are not extraordinary acts, they are the most human things in the world. He looked down at Giuseppe, whose pale face remained serene despite the tubes and wires. And sometimes, grace finds a way to meet love halfway. One of the Vatican officials opened his briefcase, withdrawing documents that seemed to glow with possibility. "The transfer to the Zurich facility has been completed. Medical transport has been arranged." Through the room's window, Marco could see protesters gathering outside the hospitals, some supporting the Pope's decision, others condemning its signs reading saint or sinner and Vatican crime wave, bobbed in the crowd like accusations made manifest. Giuseppe's eyes fluttered open, focusing on the man in white with startling clarity despite hours of unconsciousness. "Are you the angel Marco told me about?" Giuseppe whispered. The hospital chapel was a small sanctuary tucked away on the 7th floor. Its simple wooden pews facing a modest altar adorned with a single crucifix. Pope Leo XIV knelt in the front row with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime in conversation with the divine, while Marco paced the narrow aisle like a caged animal, his footsteps echoing off the plain walls. Through the chapel's single window, the lights of Rome twinkled like earthbound stars, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the surgical ward 3 floors below. "Giuseppe has been in surgery for 6 hours, Marco whispered, his voice thick with exhaustion and fear. Sofia and Luca slept curled together on a pew behind them, their small bodies finally surrendering to the emotional weight of the day. Dr. Bianchi said it would take 4 hours maximum. "Something's gone wrong." Pope Leo XIV remained motionless, his weathered hands clasped in prayer, his lips moving in silent supplication. The chapel's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, mixing with the distant sounds of hospital machinery and hushed conversations in the corridors. Beyond, Marco stopped pacing and turned to face the Pope, his teenage composure finally cracking under the pressure of months held in check. "I broke into your cathedral because I stopped believing in miracles." Because prayers didn't fix Papa's spine or pay our rent or make the loan sharks disappear. His voice rose despite the sacred space. So why are you here, praying for a man you've never met? The Pope's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Marco with the gentle intensity of someone who had witnessed both divine intervention and human tragedy in equal measure. Because faith isn't about believing miracles will happen, he said quietly. It's about believing love matters, even when everything seems lost. Before Marco could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Dr. Bianchi appeared in the chapel doorway, his surgical scrubs still damp with perspiration, his face bearing an expression that seemed to hover between confusion and wonder. "I need to speak with you both," the doctor said, his voice carrying the particular bewilderment that came to men of science, confronting something that challenged the foundation of their understanding. Giuseppe's surgery. There's been an unexpected development. Marco's heart hammered against his ribs as they followed Dr. Bianchi down the corridor toward the surgical ward. Through the observation window, Giuseppe lay on the operating table, surrounded by monitors that should have been registering the steady decline of a man fighting a losing battle against trauma and time. Instead, the readouts showed vital signs that defied every medical prediction Dr. Bianchi had made over the past 3 months. The spinal compression that should have left him paralyzed. "It's responding to treatment beyond anything we've seen before," the doctor said slowly, his eyes fixed on Giuseppe's peaceful face. "The internal bleeding stopped completely an hour ago. The brain swelling has reduced to normal levels." The phone call came at midnight, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over Marco since Giuseppe's miraculous recovery. Salvatore's voice slithered through the receiver like oil through water, each word dripping with malevolent promise that made his blood turn to ice in his veins. "The whole world knows about your PayPal charity now, ragazzo. Very touching. But debts don't disappear just because you've found a new friend in high places." A pause filled with the sound of traffic and distant laughter. "Warehouse 23. 1 hour, come alone, or we visit your father's hospital room." Marco's hand shook as he hung up. Giuseppe was finally responding to treatment, the doctor speaking cautiously of hope, and the Pope's intervention had given them a future he had stopped believing possible, like a forgotten graveyard on Rome's industrial outskirts, where ancient ambition met modern decay. Marco arrived to find the specified building, corrugated metal monument to abandonment, its windows dark as dead eyes. 3 figures waited in the amber glow of a single streetlight, their silhouettes sharp as broken glass against the night sky, punctual. "I admire that in a boy about to learn hard lessons." Salvatore stepped forward, his expensive suit incongruous in the desolate surroundings. "I'll get you the money," Marco said, hating how his voice trembled despite his attempts at courage. "The Vatican fund is being processed. The Vatican." Salvatore laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls like breaking glass. "You think the Pope's charity extends to your gambling debts? To the money you borrowed for treatments that didn't work before you got desperate enough to break into churches?" Before Marco could respond, the quiet rumble of engines filled the narrow street. 2 black sedans materialized from opposite directions, their headlights creating a corridor of light that trapped the 4 figures. Like actors on a stage of judgment, car doors opened with military precision, and Vatican security officers emerged. The ceremonial Swiss Guard, but the serious men in dark suits who protected the Pope when he moved through Rome's dangerous underbelly. Behind them, impossibly, Pope Leo XIV himself stepped into the light. "Gentlemen," the Pope said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed by cardinals and kings alike. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about Marco's obligations." Salvatore's composure cracked like ice under pressure, his predatory confidence wavering in the face of institutional power he had never imagined confronting St. Peter's Square had been transformed into something resembling both a courtroom and a cathedral. Winter sunlight streamed across the ancient cobblestones, illuminating the faces of 60,000 people who had gathered to witness what the media was calling the Vatican's trial of grace. Cardinals sat in crimson rows along the basilica steps, their expressions ranging from curious to openly supportive, while journalists from every corner of the earth filled the press sections with the hungry anticipation of witnesses to history. Marco stood at the podium in a borrowed suit that hung awkwardly on his teenage frame, his hands gripping the marble edges as if they were the only things keeping him upright. Behind him, Giuseppe sat in a wheelchair, still weak, but miraculously mobile, his presence itself a testament to the impossible. Sophia and Luca flanked their father, their bright scarves, splashes of defiant color against the austere Vatican. Saronin's Pope Leo XIV had insisted on this public reckoning. Truth shared in darkness breeds rumors, he had told Cardinal Torretti that morning. Truth shared in light breeds understanding. Now, facing an audience that included skeptical world leaders, concerned church officials, and cameras broadcasting to hundreds of millions of viewers, Marco began to speak. 3 months ago, I was a thief. His voice echoed across the square's perfect acoustics, each word landing with the weight of confession. I broke into St. Peter's Basilica, not for greed, but for love. I would have stolen from God himself to save my father's life. A murmur rippled through the audience, like wind through wheat. Cardinal Torretti's face, which had been stone throughout the week's controversy, softened with something that looked like recognition, perhaps of a son's desperate devotion that transcended institutional protocol. But I found something I wasn't looking for, Marco continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke his truth to the world. I found a man who chose mercy over justice, grace over law. Pope Leo XIV didn't just give my family money, he gave us back our faith in miracles. Giuseppe raised his trembling hand then, and the square fell silent, as if the very stones were listening. My son was scared, he said, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast space, despite his weakness. But this holy man, he gestured toward Pope Leo XIV, he showed us that love makes everything possible, even healing. Cardinal Torretti rose from his seat, his movement drawing every eye in the square. For a moment that stretched like eternity, he stood silent, his internal struggle visible on his austere features. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began to applaud. The sound started small, but grew like rolling thunder as cardinal after cardinal rose to their feet. 3 years later, the modest building in Trastevere bore little resemblance to the opulent halls of the Vatican, but it hummed with the same sense of sacred purpose. The Giuseppe Foundation, named at a recovered father's insistence, occupied 4 floors of a converted 18th-century palazzo, its walls lined with photographs of families whose lives had been transformed by what the media still called the Vatican Youth Miracle. Marco stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, watching Rome's morning chaos unfold below, while reviewing case files that would have broken his heart 3 years ago. Now they filled him with something he was still learning to recognize: hope, backed by action. At 19, he possessed the particular gravity that came to those who had stared into the abyss and chosen light over darkness. Marco, the family from Naples is here, Giuseppe announced from the doorway, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had appointed himself the Foundation's unofficial greeter. His recovery had defied every medical prediction, and he walked with only a slight limp, a reminder of grace made manifest in titanium and bone. Marco turned to see Maria Rossi clutching her 14-year-old son, Antonio, both of them wearing the particular expression of desperate hope he recognized. All too well, Antonio's letter had been one of dozens that arrived daily, caught stealing medicine for his diabetic sister, facing juvenile detention, his family drowning in medical debt. Mrs. Rossi, Marco said, gesturing toward the comfortable chairs arranged near his desk, please sit. Tell me about Antonio. As Maria began her story, the familiar litany of medical bills, insurance denials, and impossible choices, Marco felt the weight of responsibility that had become both his burden and his blessing. Each family reminded him of his own desperate night in the cathedral, but now he sat on the other side of the equation, wielding the power to transform despair into hope. The soft chime of his phone interrupted Maria's narrative. Pope Leo XIV's name appeared on the screen, and Marco excused himself to take the call in the hallway. Marco, my friend, the Pope's familiar voice carried warmth across the connection. How are we doing with the Milan family? Marco smiled at the we. Pope Leo XIV insisted on reviewing every major case personally. Little Francesca's surgery is scheduled for next week. She should be walking normally by Christmas. Excellent. And the funding for the new education wing in Palermo. Cardinal Toretti says the Vatican Bank will have the transfer completed by Friday. Marco still marveled at how Cardinal Toretti had become one of the Foundation's fiercest advocates. His initial resistance transformed into protective devotion. Through the window, Marco could see a group of teenagers gathered in the Foundation's courtyard for Myrrh Street youth, who now served as peer counselors. Their stories of transformation rippling outward like stones thrown into still water. Lucia, who had been caught robbing tourists near the Colosseum, now helped runaway children find safe shelter. Roberto, who had nearly died from a drug overdose at 15, counseled families struggling with addiction. "You know," Pope Leo XIV said, his voice carrying a note of reflection, "when I found you in the cathedral that night, I thought I was helping one desperate son save his father. I never imagined we were planting seeds for a garden this large." Marco watched as Antonio's shoulders began to relax, his mother's tears shifting from desperation to relief as Giuseppe explained the Foundation's comprehensive support system. In 3 years, they had helped over 400 families, preventing countless young people from choosing crime as their only option. "Holy Father, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. The night we met, I thought you were saving Giuseppe. But I realize now you were saving all of us. Every family we help, every child who gets a second chance. It's because you chose mercy over judgment." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the weight of shared purpose and the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. In the distance, the bells of St. Peter's chimed the hour, a constant reminder of the night that had changed everything. Marco the Pope said finally, "Do you remember what I told you that first morning in the garden? That grace finds a way to meet love halfway? I remember I was wrong about one thing. Grace doesn't meet love halfway, goes the full distance. We just have to be brave enough to let it work through us." As Marco returned to the Rossi family, he carried with him the certainty that some transformations ripple outward like waves across water, touching shores we never knew existed, creating circles of mercy that would outlast them all.